Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here tonight to chat with everyone in the room and everyone online about a topic that I am extremely passionate about, to Chris's point, which is autism and leadership in tech. So the first thing I want to just quickly cover off before we get started any further is the two different types of ways that individuals with disabilities like to be addressed. So we have identity first language, or we have person first language. And this is 100% unique to the individual. There is no best practice blanket statement to utilize here. So don't just assume. It's always best to ask, because this is also one of those prickly topics where you'll get chewed out if you say it to the wrong person the wrong way. So identity first is about recognizing that your disability or your neurodiversity is a part of you. So that is part of your identity. And so therefore you would use language such as you are autistic, or I am autistic, which is my preferred way of thinking about my autism. Because if I had autism, then naturally that would also mean that I could not have autism. And wouldn't that be great to just leave behind at home every now and again? Alas, that's not the way that I see it. So I am autistic, because it is always with me. However, person first language is basically centered around the idea that you are a whole human being and you are a whole person, and then your disability is an extension of that. So some people do prefer it that way. So it is always a really, really good thing just to make sure that you check that with the individual that you may be speaking to, how they may like to be preferred, to be addressed. So that's just to tidy that up. I'll be using these two terms interchangeably to my own benefit throughout the presentation. So don't crucify me. Awesome. Chris did give me an introduction, but for those of you that don't know me, hi, my name is April. I've been in product and engineering for well over 10 years in Brisbane, and I can't make up my mind which side of the fence I want to sit on. So I have spent my entire career zigzagging between product and engineering, because I find the problem spaces equally exciting. I am a people leader. Which, despite being autistic, is actually possible. And that's what I'm hoping we can all achieve here tonight, is realizing that autistic people are fully capable of things. And in case you haven't already heard, I am autistic. So I didn't get the diagnosis of autism when I was a kid. I got it as an adult, and that whole process was actually quite lengthy. When I was a kid, I did spend quite a lot of time in a youth psychiatric facility where I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. That's a really common misdiagnosis for women with autism because of how flawed and skewed the diagnostic criteria for autism is. So it goes without saying that there are probably lots of other females out there that have got the same kind of diagnosis that are probably also on their own journey of discovery. But then my husband came into the scene. He is front and row just here. And as most people with, partners of some description do, they get to know that person really, really intimately. And so my husband has seen me at some of my most vulnerable moments, and has also been the person that has been my confidant around things that I struggle with and my internal challenges that I have. And his best friend is autistic. And he noticed signs and symptoms within me that suggested, or prompted him to suggest to me, that perhaps I too should explore an autism diagnosis. So it wasn't even by a medical professional that I was told, maybe you should see if you're autistic. It was genuinely my husband, who had spent years with me at this point. So I didn't believe him at first, because my idea of autism at the time was the screaming child in the shopping centre causing the scene, or the kid at school that, was causing such a ruckus in the room that you're like, oh, it's the weirdo acting up again. I did not seem that I was the definition of autism, or that I could possibly be autistic. And I still believe that a lot of individuals in society view the representation of autism as that little boy having the tantrum in the shopping centre or causing the scene in school. And that just isn't the case. So I am autistic, though, which is both a relieving thing to realise that the negative self-talk that I have curated over the years of not understanding the world that I live in is for a reason. It's not because I'm just stupid, which I inherently felt. I felt on a daily basis that I was stupid because I didn't understand the joke, or someone would say something to me and I would stare at them blankly And it wouldn't be until maybe 2, 3, 5 seconds later that I'd go, oh shit, they've just said that. And then I'd be able to respond. All of these little things that made me feel slow and stupid and weak, they were for a reason. And that reason is because my brain is wired differently, physically differently. So there was relief. And then there was also grief. There was the grief side of it where you kind of realize, wow, I've just spent the end of my entire life living in a world that just wasn't designed for me and making me feel like shit. So that was hard to come about. But despite all of it, I do feel pretty proud of where I have gotten to, and I have managed to achieve some pretty awesome things. And I didn't do it in the most healthiest of ways. So this talk was originally supposed to be about how I, as an autistic person, can be a people leader. But I mean, honestly, I spent a lot of time emulating neurotypical behavior. So that's not really what I wanted to talk about today. What I wanted to actually talk about is how we can develop healthier environments for individuals that are autistic to be able to thrive in people leadership, because we are 100% capable without having to emulate the neurotypical behavior. 20% of the global population is estimated to be neurodiverse. So neurodiversity covers OCD, dyslexia, ADHD, autism, and there's a couple of others that I can't remember the entire list, I'm sorry. But 20%, that's almost a quarter of the world's human population that are thought to be neurodiverse. So we're not like a super, super tiny piece of the pie, we're a pretty substantive piece of the pie. And if we zoom in a little bit closer to home, it's thought that 1 in 7 Australians are diagnosed autistic. And the operative word there is diagnosed, because people like me are being diagnosed later in our lives, which will eventually lead to an uplift in these statistics as well. This particular data set is from 2018. So not super old, but still old enough that, you know, they're probably due to uplift these numbers in the next couple of years. So 1 in 7 Australians are autistic, but 38% of us are employed. 38%. Is anyone else is just gobsmacked at how low that number is as me? So the question begs to be asked, why? Why is that number so low? Well, a few weeks ago, I was approached by a recruiter for a CTO role for a company here in Brisbane. And this recruiter is someone that had engaged with a lot of my content on LinkedIn, where I have publicly spoken about my autism diagnosis. So when I saw the position description and the fact that he had even profiled me for the role, I figured, okay, this company that I'm probably about to go and interview with knows about my autism diagnosis. So the position description looked great. For all accounts, I was like, you know what, this would be an absolutely, you know, perfect next step for me in my career. I'm ready to move into that C-suite position. You know, I've been at the VP level for a while now. It's time to move up. I had the first interview with the co-founder and CEO of the company, and it went swimmingly. It was like an hour and 10-minute long interview where we, you know, gas-bagged about all sorts of things relating to tech and speaking about the problems that that particular company was experiencing. And I walked away from that conversation with a second interview already lined up. That's how much he liked me. So the second interview was to be with the lead architect, the person from HR, the co-founder, the other co-founder, as well as the founder that I had just met with. So a panel of 4. And I got to the second interview a couple of weeks later, and the recruiter was there, and he was like, "You're in for such a good shot. It's down to you and 3 other people." And I was like, "All right, these are pretty good odds. Like, you know, I'll go in with this. This is cool. It's cool." And I got into this panel with the individuals, and I was on one side and they were on the other side. And the first 55 minutes or so of this interview went brilliantly. The questions they asked me, you know, me and the lead architect, we were jamming, and, you know, CTO jamming with the lead architect is always a good sign, right? Like, you don't want them to be these ones, you want them to be like these ones. So it was just, you know, exactly. Like, you know, just professional kisses, you know. But it was going really, really well. For all accounts, people were nodding. I was able to really comfortably answer the questions. And then the lady from HR towards the end of the interview said to me, "So, you know, what is it that makes you as like a standout? What is it that you feel is going to make you effective in this role?" And I said, almost verbatim, my response was, my autism has enabled me to be very detail oriented and specific. And therefore, I'm very deliberate and intentional with the structures and the decisions and the processes that I put in place. And it sounds like that's what your company needs right now. The minute that that sentence came out of my mouth, there was this like collective breath that got drawn up, and they all just kind of sat back in their chairs. And I kind of felt the energy in the room shift, and I've gone, what's just happened? And I ran through the sentence in my head because there was this just crushing silence in the room. And then I realized that they didn't know I was autistic. And the silence continued for what felt like an eternity before finally they started asking me questions. And the questions came back to my capability, as though I hadn't just fucking spoken about my capability for the last 55 minutes. And I think the most insulting question was, how can you be an effective leader when you have autism? And that was pretty much the moment that I realized I wasn't going to get the job. And I still answered the best that I possibly could. I said, oh, I've consumed lots of literature. Like I've done all the courses. I've done everything that I need to do. I've ticked all of the goddamn boxes that say that I'm competent at doing this. And then I walked away, and 3 days later, I got the call that I had not got the job. And I asked for feedback because that's what every good person does. You get feedback. Oh, they loved you. They thought that you were great. You interviewed brilliantly. They just decided to go with someone else. I will never be able to prove that it was because I'm autistic that I did not get that job. And maybe it's not. Maybe it had nothing to do with it. But the reaction that they had and then the way that I felt was very uncomfy. And so the number one factor, and my lived experience that I just shared with you is actually backed by studies and data that say this exact same thing. The number one limiting factor to autistic people gaining employment is actually society. It's society's perception of the autistic community. So what can we do? What can we do collectively, both as a neurodiverse community and a neurotypical community and just a cohort of human beings in the human species actually do together to break down the fundamentally exclusionary nature of workplaces to make and build an equitable foundation where everyone gets to thrive? Thankfully, there's data for that too. So I've just walked through that slide. Let's go to the next one. Perfect. So the data that we have got in front of us that talks about what the number one challenge or what the challenges are for autistic individuals in the workplace has already been spelled out for us. Does anyone want to take a guess at what it might be? 3, 2, 1. Social and communication issues. So overwhelmingly, the data came back with the number one outlier always being that social and communication issues were a huge challenge for autistic individuals in the workplace. Now, just take a second and have a think when someone in your team may have been stuck so heavily on a detail and been asking so many goddamn questions that you had to roll your eyes, or you got agitated, or you felt like they were being disruptive. Or maybe someone was asking so many questions that you felt your authority challenged. How did that make you feel about that person? What was your perception of that person from that point forward? Did you raise it with them in performance reviews with them? How did you treat that person, and what kind of score did you give that person? Autism manifests not as being autistic. It manifests in direct and blunt communication. It manifests as being really pedantic and meticulous with details. It manifests as not being best buds with everyone in the same room. Or maybe the other way, maybe they're coming across as creepy because they want to do everything and they want to know everything about you and they want to go to lunch with you. Autism manifests so differently in the workplace, and we are applying a neurotypical lens to behavior that is not neurotypical. So social and communication issues are a big challenge for us. But guess what? Communication skills can be learned. So communication inherently is a set of skills. Our ability to effectively articulate ourselves, garner a shared understanding, and ultimately have productive conversations can all be taught, and we can all learn them. It's hard. Communication is hard for everyone. So this isn't just a neurodiverse versus a neurotypical thing. Everyone struggles with communication. I don't know how many times I've had all kinds of individuals talk about how hard it is just to communicate. And neurodiverse people don't just have one set of languages either. For example, my husband, who has ADHD, he likes to always assume that I know common sense things. And so if he's explaining something to me, he might skip 3 or 4 instructions in the center. And me, who needs to literally compile and run every single step of an instruction, I freeze, I error out, and I don't know how the heck to proceed. And I'm like, no, can you go back like 5 steps? Like, what happens then? And he's like, well, that's just common knowledge. Or me, right? When I'm communicating, we'll have conversations where sometimes I'll actually finish the conversation in my head and I'll verbalize something else that has got nothing to do with what he just said. And so he almost has to get the bloody chalkboard out and do the whole like twine between picture things to try to work out how exactly I landed on the sentence that I did. So it's not even just about neurodiverse people having the same language they can use to communicate, neurotypicals having their own. It's just we all communicate differently. And that's the catch-22, right? We all communicate, we all process information, we do all of these things so differently. But I do have 3 tips that I can share that everyone in this room, our neurotypicals and our neurodivergents, can all benefit from. And the first one is reading out loud. When I was younger, I actually had troubles with speaking. I had lots of issues with my speech, and so I had to go and see a speech therapist. How an autism diagnosis was missed, I have got no idea. Speech issues as a child is like a very, very prominent characteristic of autism, so go figure. But what my speech therapist made me do was read out loud. And she wasn't making me read out loud boring stuff. She'd tell me, what's your favorite book right now? Read that out loud to me. Practice the pauses, practice the full stops, practice the questions, and practice the exclamations. Just practice the intonation and the grammatical impact of what it is that you're saying. And what that actually helped me with was with articulation, with intonation, and also with grammatical impact. Because without those things, you just end up thinking like no one can quite understand what it is that you're saying. And are you really saying something that people are going to understand? No. Like that's just too much, right? And so being able to do this thing, and my poor parents at home, my favorite book was Charlotte's Web. And man, I was fixated on Charlotte's Web so bad that I had dreams where I screamed out in the middle of the night, Charlotte, no, don't die. Like I'm not kidding. Call my mom, she'll tell you. Like I was obsessed with Charlotte's Web, and it made it even worse because they had to listen to me in my room talking double T, double E, double R, double I, double I, double F, double I, double C, 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 C. That's the goose, if none of you know Charlotte's Web. The goose spoke in multiples of letters. So they had to listen to all of that. But what that has done for me is now enable me to speak as hopefully clearly as I think I'm speaking to you all right now. And so this is a framework, or this is a technique that can be really, really useful for neurotypical individual if they potentially have issues with their own articulation. But with neurodiverse people, it gives them a framework to operate within. It gives them the structure that we so desperately need to understand how it is that we need to communicate to be understood. And then we've got a less quirky one, which is simply a communication quadrant. So the communication quadrant, this was introduced to me probably back in, I think, 2012 when I did my first ever leadership training course. The communication quadrant is based upon the very loose theory that humans consume information in one of 4 ways, at least one of 4 ways. Everyone in this room, you apparently either fall into a what basket, a why basket, a how basket, or a what if basket. So what that means is that if you're in the what basket, you just care about what's going on, what's the goss, what's the details, like what is happening. If you're a why person, you care about the context. You want to go back, you want to dissect it, you want to pull it apart, you want to understand everything that went into this very point that has had this decision or this communication piece become relevant. And then you've got the how, and the how is all about the execution. It's all about the how is this going to be done? How do you want it done? What does the roadmap look like? How is this going to be played out? And then you've got the what ifs. And the what ifs are all about the what, or even like you can even call these the whataboutisms. It's the what if this happens? So what are the good things that could come out of this communication that we're talking about? What are the bad things that could come out of it? And then what are the unhappy paths? So we always need to account for the unhappy paths, right? Because those are the ones that are going to get you, similar to in engineering. You've got to think of them, you know? So that's where the what if side of it comes in. This communication quadrant has saved me so many times, because for me, if I always use this when I'm structuring my comms, the responses or the feedback that I receive is always really, really productive. No one feels lost. Everyone feels aligned. The questions are really good clarifying questions, and it helps garner this shared understanding. But equally on the same thread, are the individual themselves, that's the audience to the feed or to the communication or to the feedback, is understanding it too. Very, very few times have I had someone come back and say, this makes absolutely no sense, you're an idiot. So this is a communication tool that can be really, really useful for both neurodiverse individuals that are trying to figure out what to communicate, how much to communicate, but then also for neurotypical individuals, this helps you actually structure your own communications, because communication is just hard, full stop. So really, really useful tool, swear by it. And then we've got a tool or a tip or an activity that so many autistic individuals do, and that is scripting. Before I came here tonight, I have got like 15 different scripts in my head that I could run through. I can talk about the traffic, or I can talk about the weather. I can talk about how it's a little bit milder today than what it has been last week. Last week was freezing. This week is much milder. Having scripts enables you to go into a situation with much greater confidence. And so while neurotypical people, this may not be as applicable to you, scripting is actually extremely helpful for those of us that need that extra bit of confidence behind us in social situations. So I like to think of it in threes. Script out at least 3 different scenarios. If you're having one conversation, what are the 3 different scenarios that could occur in that conversation, dependent upon your goal of that conversation? We very rarely go into a conversation without there being some sort of a goal, right? So what is that goal? And then what are the 3 different scenarios that could occur in that particular space? Almost like a make your own adventure. Anticipate at least 3 different responses. So for each of those scenarios, what are the different responses that you could receive back from that party that you're in that conversation with? And those responses can be dependent upon your relationship with that person. It can be dependent upon what you are asking of that person, or how the conversation has started. But having that anticipation of what they might come back with will then enable you to then think about what your response back to them might be. And then you basically go into it with enough of a canned response that you're able to then start to have the conversation flow and start to feel more confident in how you want the conversation to go. You start to feel a sense of control and a sense of confidence. And that's what it's really about. It's about having confidence. And then practice it at least 3 times. You don't want to get them mixed up. You know, you want to make sure that you understand what's going on in each one of your stories in your mind. So this is a tool that is just invaluable. Scripting, it's frustrating at times because you have to remember all of your different scripts, but it's also a really, really valuable mechanism for, at the very least, making yourself feel confident and having conviction in your own abilities going into a conversation. And that's half the battle, right? Is having that confidence in yourself. So these are 3 tips, right? These are the 3 tips, and these are the 3 actionable things that we can put into place that they're not that hard, right? Like, I don't feel like I've gone over anything here that's going to be huge amounts of budget need to get put towards it, or, you know, this is a huge organizational shift that needs to happen. These are things that we can all in this room do starting from tomorrow that are a really nice, easy way to actually become more to develop greater accommodations in our workplaces for all different kinds of individuals. And that's kind of the key here. It's not about having big budgets or things like that. It's about these little things that we can do to really help build that more inclusive environment for everyone. So those were the main things, right? But this Venn diagram clearly has productive conversations, shared understanding with communication skills in the center, right? That's beautiful. But we have got this lonely little circle, this little bubble down here in the bottom left-hand side. And this is the biggest thing that I could, if there is one thing to take away from anything that I rabbit on about tonight, it is these exact next words. Communication skills and social etiquette are 100% mutually exclusive. So what do I mean when I say that? Social etiquette is going into a meeting and wanting to have pleasantries before you kick into what that meeting is all about. Social etiquette is about laughing jovially someone says a joke, or basically it's the style or it's the environment in which you decide to try and create using subtext or innuendos or agendas, you know what I mean? Like this is the subtext of conversations that we have. Social etiquette is 100% subjective. These are not skills that you can learn because they are going to be different every single environment that you're in. And this is something that is extremely, extremely, extremely hard for neurodiverse folk to try and bed down, because especially when they go into an unknown situation. So the biggest thing that we can do is we can ensure organizationally that we do not penalize people for the way that we perceive how they have played their part in our own play. We've got our own play going on in our head, right? And just because that person may not be playing it the way that we want them to, that's not a deficit in their communication skills. That is simply a difference in social etiquette. And this is the number one thing that we can do in our workplaces, where we don't say, oh yeah, that person's a bit cold, or yeah, I don't know, like I can never quite tell if they're being rude or if they're being a dick. Like they never send an emoji in their Slack message. Like, you know, like these are the things that if we just move the social etiquette side of it to the side for a second and just look at someone's communication skills at face value, that will greatly remove the barriers that we're seeing for social and communication challenges with autistics in the workplace. So social etiquette is theatre. There you go. We have some peripherals. Those were 3 really useful, actionable tools that we can basically put into place. But then we've got a set of peripherals around the outside that, you know, they're also equally important, but they're not things that necessarily are going to make or break. And the first one that we've got is that perception is not reality. If we're abiding by what we just spoke about, where we do remove social etiquette from the way that we perceive someone's communication skills, then perception not being reality needs to be a given, right? Assumed intent is not reality. And we need to be really, really conscious of that. And we need to be super, super self-aware of that so that we can unpack our own prejudices that we may be harboring. For example, I was working for a company a little while ago that was acquired by an American company. And as part of that acquisition, we had to sign new employment contracts. There's a company that acquired us was American. And so for our employment contracts, they used a boilerplate Australian employment contract template off like the Fair Work website or somewhere, right? It was super boilerplate, standard, right? And I had an employee come to me when he was signing his, where it was red pen all over it. He wanted all of these different things changed. And because this was a boilerplate template, my new VP was like, is this guy a quack? Like what is going on here? And he was instantly perceived as a troublemaker. And it cost me nothing to go over that employment contract with him. It was me doing my job. He was clearly nervous that he was about to sign an employment contract for a company that he hadn't willingly applied to work at, right? When you're in an acquisition and you suddenly have to adopt an entire new company's principles and philosophies and way of working, you haven't chosen that for yourself. So, you know, he was going over everything with a fine-tooth comb because he was nervous. And so I was doing my job. I was being a people leader and I went over that employment contract with him. But on the company side of the equation that had just acquired us, he was a troublemaker and challenging authority and had a black mark against his name. And there was talk of him being put on the list. Now, if you don't know what the list is, every single company has got a list of regrettable losses and non-regrettable losses. And you make your way onto that list before you're even considered a loss, if you read between the lines. So this individual had that black mark put against his name, and that was that. You know, he left shortly after. He wasn't managed out. I would not do that. I'm not that type of leader. He left on his own accord to go to an amazing new opportunity. But that is the perfect example of exclusionary behavior in play in the workplace. All I had to do was my job, which was appease him and make him feel supported and know that we were going to continue to look after him even after this acquisition. But the fact that the company had a different perception of him is not okay. So your interpretation does not reflect their intent. If there's one thing that human beings are really good at, it's assuming intent and then getting super mad and frustrated about it. You know, I mean, I do it myself too. Like, I'm not going to say that I'm immune to this, but it's something that we need to get better at clarifying. If we're not sure of someone's intent, or we immediately jump to they're the bad guy, we need to probably do some digging here and ask clarifying questions. What did you mean by this? Or even more directly, did you mean X, Y, and Z? It doesn't hurt anyone, does it? To simply ask the question. All that can come out of that is, oh, it's just a misunderstanding. Awesome, that's great. Move on with our days. So always ask and clarify intent. Never assume intent. And then the final thing is for us to be self-aware. As I've said, we all harbor internal prejudices. We've all grown up in a very particular type of society. So whenever we can, check ourselves. Like, are we applying incorrect lenses to this situation? Whether you know someone's neurodiverse or not is completely besides the point. The point is simply, this human being in front of me, am I wrongly accusing them of something in my own head? Or is that reality? You know, like, you need to interrogate your own thoughts to figure out what is going on so that you don't just subconsciously apply and assume the intent of another individual. Workplace culture. This one's a fun topic. Workplace culture has already started to see a shift. The fact that we have even got the ability to have so many more organisations work from home due to COVID is probably one of the better things to come out of this bloody pandemic. But equally, workplace culture is just 100% inherently ableist. And the reason for that is because what workplace culture is built upon is the premise that we make work an enjoyable place to work. Except, whose enjoyable place to work is that? Predominantly right now, it's a neurotypical individuals who loves to go, or a man even, who loves to go down to the pub and have a beer with his mates. You know, that this is still so rampant in our culture that we need to shift this type of behavior and this type of thinking. And oh my God, if I see another relationships with peers on a performance review, I'm going to scream. The number one reason for that is because autistic people, some autistic people, not everyone, but overwhelmingly, have got really polarizing relationship types. We're either extremely detached and you're an acquaintance and I speak to you for work things and work things only, or I love you and I want to message you every single day and I want to go to lunch with you and I want to be your best friend and I hold you near and dear. And so at the beginning of the talk, I spoke about that person that might be too cold or might be too creepy, right? I'm not saying that we need to excuse creepy behavior. Absolutely not. We definitely need to draw the line there. But we should not be penalizing if it's the opposite way. We have got that individual that's cold or doesn't want to attend social events or goes out of their way to not be part of those group activities. We need to find other ways of measuring culture that isn't just about relationships. Or if we want to look at relationships, then we need to make the spectrum and the criteria far more varied than it currently is. Emotion in the workplace. How many times has anyone here been told to act professional or be professional? Emotion is just naturally considered bad in the workplace. If you display too much of it, oh, you're a bit over the top. Or if you display crying, for example, then, oh, you know, that's not good. That's inappropriate to do at work. Like, you need to go somewhere. It's just one of those things that you're viewed as being a culture vulture, ultimately, if you display any kind of emotion that isn't with the grain of the rest of the organization. And so we've even seen terms such as culture ad come out because we've already identified, right, that we can't say culture fit anymore because having a monolithic culture at work doesn't serve anyone. That's not helpful to anybody because we are all so varied. Emotion is one of those things that needs to play into that. Not saying we should have everyone crying at their desks, but we absolutely shouldn't be penalizing people for it either. So rethinking culture 100% needs to happen, and we need to keep the gas on with this one because there is already momentum happening here. We already know that culture needs to shift. That is already happening thanks to the next generation coming through. I don't know if anyone else is like as rampant on TikTok as I am, but Gen Z are savages. Like they're gonna like take us to town for sure. So, you know, why don't we actually be part of that change though, and start to listen to some of the things that they have to say and how they do want workplaces to be in the future? Because if they don't, like they're already threatening us. They will leave our workplaces and then we will have nothing. So it is in our best interest as leaders of organizations to also really listen to what our people have to say and what they believe to be an enjoyable place to work. I'm almost done, guys. So to wrap up, communication skills are 100% mutually exclusive to social etiquette. They are completely different kettles of fish. And one set, go to town with your performance reviews on helping develop those autistic and neurodiverse folk in your organization. Help them grow and develop, send them on courses, grow and nurture the communication skill set. Social etiquette, put it to the side. It's really, really hard. I cannot tell you how many times I've gone into a situation and I have frozen up, or I've had to go and sit on the outside, or I've gone and sat in the car and cried. You know, it's hard. Please stop aligning us and measuring us to your version of a social situation. Perception is not reality. Has anyone else heard like the proverb, got to get curious, or time to get curious? It really is time to get curious. Like we've got to put that fear that we have of being direct or being confrontational with someone aside. And we actually do have to start asking them the clarifying question of, did you mean X by this? Or what did you mean by that? Because nothing bad is going to come out of that, only good. And of course, workplace culture needs a total makeover. We do really need to keep the pedal on with that one. I've got another one after this. Perfect. So I'm coming to the end of my talk now. And so I'm starting to also figure out, oh my God, what was I going to say again? To the neurodiverse people that may be in this room or on this call, we have got a responsibility to continue taking up space and to continue speaking for ourselves. Because if we don't, the non-autistic voices will speak for us, and they are extremely damaging to us because things such as autism speaks and the puzzle piece come about. And I don't know if anyone else in the room knows that kind of thing that they're doing, but it's similar to gay conversion therapy. It's not nice. It's really, really not nice for our brains. I and other girls like me and other individuals will continue to experience missed and late diagnoses. Workplaces will continue to be inflexible, and autistic people will overwhelmingly be put into infantilized jobs because we're not seen as capable. But we 100% are. Every single one of us can be a leader if we really wanted that hard enough or enough. So we do have a responsibility to keep taking up space. And for the neurotypical folk in this room, I am still learning. I am still learning my real brain, my real self, and I'm still peeling back layer upon layer of neurotypical armor that I have worn for what has been a marathon of my life. And it's great that I'm being given the platform to do so, but as I am taking off this armor, a new weight is being added, which is what happened with that CTO role? How many more times is that going to happen again to me? How many more times am I going to have prejudice against me for something that I can't control and that actually has no impact? It's purely because someone else's perception sees me as being not competent. So for me, I feel like I've got no choice but to continue to advocate for at least myself. So to that end, thank you everyone so much for giving us this platform and listening to me speak tonight. Thank you very, very much.